All right, let's go ahead and get into section 4.1 notes. We're going to talk about special segments in triangles. So we're going to look at 4 key terms to start. All right, so each one of these key terms will do something different to our triangle. And what we want to do today is be able to identify what actually happens given a key vocab word. All right, so first off is perpendicular bisector. All right, so perpendicular bisector. All right, this is a segment that passes through a midpoint and is going to create 2 things. So in a triangle, if we have a perpendicular bisector, we are going to have a line that drops down and hits at the midpoint. All right, because it hits at the midpoint and it's perpendicular, it's going to do 2 things to our triangle. All right, what's going to happen is it's going to form 90-degree angles. All right, so there's 2 90-degree angles right there because remember a straight line adds up to 180. And then the other thing it's going to do is split it into 2 congruent parts on the bottom. So let's say our triangle was A, B, C. All right, so what happens when they give us a perpendicular bisector, and let's say that it hit at point D right there. All right, because the perpendicular bisector hits at the midpoint, we have 2 things that take place in our triangle. It now makes the bottom part, or the piece where it touches, equal. So BD is equal to DC because it hit at the midpoint and split it into 2 equal pieces. All right, you'll also notice that it forms 90-degree angles. So technically, angle ADC equals 90, and technically angle ADB would equal 90 degrees because it's perpendicular bisector. All right, our second term is angle bisector. So let's go back to chapter 1. All right, remember an angle bisector is going to split us into equal angles. All right, so again, let's say we have triangle, let's use different letters this time. So let's say we have triangle JOS. All right, an angle bisector is going to drop down, and let's say that we hit at H right there. All right, what happens with an angle bisector is it splits us into 2 equal angles. So what happens is angle OJH is equal to angle SJH. All right, so it splits us into 2 equal angles up by angle J. Remember, we'll use 3 letters to write our angle. All right, our third term is a median. A median is a segment that goes from a vertex to the midpoint. So if I have a triangle, again, let's mix up our letters. Let's call it S, A, N. And let's say that we drop this median straight down, and let's say it hits at point E. All right, what happens with the median is it hits at the midpoint here, so these 2 pieces become equal. So AE is equal to NE. All right, so let's look at our last one. Our last one, in altitude drops down and it forms a 90-degree angle. So let's use the letters F, R, I. All right, let's drop down in altitude in our picture. And altitude will drop down, and altitude does one thing to the picture. It forms 90-degree angles where it touches. So technically, and let's say it hit at D right here, so technically angle FDI is equal to 90, and technically angle FDR is equal to 90. All right, so here's the basis of this. Altitude will form one thing. It'll form 90-degree angles. Median will form one thing. It'll form 2 congruent parts from the line that it touches at the midpoint. Angle bisector will split it into 2 equal angles by angle J in this picture. And then perpendicular bisector is the one definition that does 2 things to our picture. It forms a 90-degree angle where it touches the midpoint, and it splits that line into two equal parts where it touches. All right, so perpendicular bisector has two things. Angle bisector, median, and altitude has one. Today, our goal is to be able to identify them in pictures. Tomorrow, we'll look at, can we solve these when we're given an equation in certain spots? All right, so let's look at some pictures. We are going to pick which one it is based on the markings of the picture. You'll notice our first picture has two things marked in it. We have 90 degrees and we have two congruent pieces. All right, remember the tick marks mean congruent. All right, if we have 90 and congruent, we technically call it a perpendicular bisector. It formed both items. All right, if you want to abbreviate perpendicular bisector, you can use the symbol and then write the word bisector. Either one of these would be correct. If you're looking to abbreviate, use the symbol. All right, let's look at the second one. Letter B, you'll notice, only has tick marks, so it's split a line into two congruent parts. If it only splits a line into two congruent parts, we call it the median. The median. All right, let's look at C. C splits it into two equal angles. If we split it into two equal angles, we call it the angle bisector. All right, the third one, you'll notice, gives us two equal parts only, and that's all it gives us. So again, this would be considered a median. Only split it into two equal parts. That's all we know from the picture. All right, let's look at some more. Letter E. Letter E, notice, gives us 90 and congruent tick marks, so it did two things to our picture. So it would be a perpendicular bisector. I'm going to abbreviate this time to save some writing. All right, letter F, notice my line that splits it into two equal angles. If it's two equal angles, it would be considered an angle bisector. All right, letter G. Letter G gives me 90 and tick marks. 90 and tick marks, it does two things, so we call it a perpendicular bisector. All right, let's go to letter H. Letter H only gives us tick marks. If we just split a line into two equal parts from a segment, we call that the median. Split it into two equal parts only. And now letter I. Letter I we haven't done yet. It only forms a 90, and that's all it does. If it only forms a 90 and nothing else, we call it an altitude. All right, so we're basing it on the markings in the picture. We don't put our own markings in yet if they give us the picture. All right, now let's fill out our picture based on what we have, and then let's state what is true. AO is an altitude. So an altitude tells us that this forms a 90-degree angle. So technically, angle AOE should equal 90. And now remember, they add up to 180 on a straight line, so technically this one is also 90, which would be AOC is 90. All right, so altitude only forms 90-degree angles. Let's go to letter B. Letter B says it's a median. A median, we'll split it into two congruent parts where the line hits. All right, so I put my tick marks into the picture, and then I can state that CO is equal to EO. Now again, we're eventually going to have equations in these pictures, so we'll know what to set equal based on the key vocab word from our definition. All right, letter C. AO is an angle bisector of ACE, so AO is going to split this into two equal angles. So technically, if I use the three letters, angle CAO is equal to angle EAO. Remember, we want to use three letters. Trace the three letters to name your angle. The last one is a perpendicular bisector. So remember, it's going to do two things to our picture. It's going to form 90-degree angles where it touches, and it's also going to hit at the median and form two congruent parts. So we know a couple things from this picture. CO has to be equal to EO because it hit at the midpoint. All right, we also know that those angles equal 90 by angle O, so I'm going to use three letters. Angle BOE would have to be equal to 90. And remember, this one would technically be 90, so angle BOC has to be equal to 90 degrees. So again, perpendicular bisector does two things. Everything else just does one. All right, now we're going to draw some pictures of it and try to see what we can do. It says that DG is a median of triangle DEF. So let's try to draw a triangle DEF. Now, you'll notice that it says DG. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a line from D down to the other line, and I'm going to call it G where it hits. Now, because this said median, I know that it splits these two into equal parts. So I know that EG has to be equal to FG. All right, so we want to make sure we can draw the picture because eventually we're going to draw these and solve them. All right, let's look at the next one. FB is an altitude of DEF. So let's draw triangle DEF. Now you'll notice it says FB, so I'm going to go from point F and I'm going to draw a line to my other line and call it point B where it touches. This says altitude, so I know that it forms 90-degree angles where it touches. Remember, if that one's 90, then the one next to it has to be 90 because they add up to 180 on a straight line. So technically in this picture, if I use three letters and I name it, FBD equals 90 degrees, and angle FBE equals 90 degrees. All right, let's keep going. Here we go. Let's see what the next vocab word, it says angle bisector of DEF. So let's draw our triangle DEF. All right, it says EJ, so I'm going to connect a line from E to the other line and call it J. This said angle bisector, so I know it splits angle E into two equal angles. I'm going to use three letters to label this. Angle DEJ has to be equal to angle FEJ. Remember, we use three letters. We trace those letters to form the angle. All right, our last one is perpendicular bisector. Notice AT is perpendicular bisector of DEF. So let's draw a triangle DEF. And it says that point T is on EF. So let's put point T somewhere on EF. And it says that it goes straight up and hits at point A. Now remember, it does two things when I have a perpendicular bisector, and this was a T down here, sorry, it's hard to see. Remember, it'll form 90-degree angles, and it splits it into two equal parts, so there's some info that we know here. We know that ET, the segment, has to be equal to FT, because perpendicular bisector hits at the midpoint and splits it into two equal parts of a line. You'll also notice that it formed 90-degree angles, so technically angle ATF should equal 90 degrees, and angle ATE should equal 90 degrees. All right, so again, quick recap of today's lesson is we want to be able to identify in a picture based on its markings which one of the four terms it is, and we want to be able to draw a picture and label our picture based on the key vocab word. Perpendicular bisector does two things. It forms 90-degree angles and two equal parts of a line. Altitude forms one thing, 90-degree angles. Median forms one thing, two equal parts of a line. And the last is angle bisector. It splits the angle into two equal angles. All right, we will begin practicing some of these, and then tomorrow we'll look at solving these when they give us an equation and a certain definition.